Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbart Gaming. This is part 2 of my big Shining Force Retrospective series. If you missed the first episode, it covered a whole bunch of stuff, including the history, some snippets from developer interviews, a complete synopsis of the story, and a review of the very first Shining Force title, which was released for the Sega Genesis/Mega Drive. In today's episode, I'll be showing you the next entry in the Shining Force series, Shining Force Gaiden for the Game Gear. This one was a Japanese exclusive for its home system, but we'd later see a translation in the West as Book 1 of Shining Force CD. Shining Force CD, of course, contained this game as well as Shining Force Gaiden 2 and some brand new stuff. But back to the business at hand, we'll only be talking about Shining Force Gaiden for the Game Gear today. This is a slightly shorter game than the original, and since we already covered a lot of the series' history, this will also be a shorter video than last time. On December 25th, yes, Christmas Day 1992, Sega released the first portable entry into the Shining Force series for the Game Gear in Japan. The game was known as Shining Force Gaiden Jashi no Kunie, and sorry if I pronounced any of that wrong. Anywho, it translates roughly into English as Shining Force Expedition to the Land of Evil Gods, which probably makes this game sound a little more epic than it actually is. Unfortunately, unlike last time, I haven't seen any translated interviews about this game that I can share with you for some insights into how it got made. What I can tell you is that the game was primarily headed up by Shugo Takahashi, the brother of Sonic Software Planning's Hiroyuki Takahashi. The development of Shining Force Gaiden 1 and 2 for the Game Gear and Shining Force 2 for the Genesis all happened basically simultaneously. The main composer for the series, Motoaki Takanouchi, came aboard initially with Shining Force Gaiden, and his excellent music would become a staple of the series, bringing its musical bona fides to the next level. Now let's talk about how Shining Force Gaiden differs from the previous entry in the series, the original Shining Force. First, it's a much shorter game. There are only 4 chapters this time around, and most people will probably finish it in roughly 10 hours on their first try. Secondly, the town exploration that helped make the original Shining Force stand out from other strategy RPGs? Well, that's gone. Now we just have a simple camp that we can visit between fights or if we retreat from battle. Story events happen on the battlefield either before or after fights now. The strategic gameplay, however, is just as good as it was before, if not better. Enemy AI was altered for the series from this point onward, and it definitely shows. And yeah, the graphics have taken a significant hit thanks to the Game Gear's small, low-resolution screen. And if you were to play this game on real hardware, well, the Game Gear's native screen is really washed out and blurry. Now the PSG music, however, is fantastic, some of the best you'll ever hear in any Game Gear or Sega Master System title. Anyway, that's really enough preamble for this one. Next up, my complete game breakdown including the entire plot and every battle. If you want to avoid spoilers, go ahead and stop the video now. No more warnings, it's all spoilers from this point onward. Still with me? Alright, let's get on with it. Before we begin the game proper, I'll note that this game is only available in Japanese on the Game Gear. There isn't even a fan translation. I know a little Japanese, but if I get a plot point or a name wrong, I'm sorry, and just let me know in the comments. Try not to be too mean about it, huh? As I mentioned before, there is an official English version of this game included in Shining Force CD, but we're not looking at that game today, only this one. Now, you will see that I reference it now and then, just to see how a few name translation and plot events compare, but I'll mostly be saving that stuff for the Shining Force CD episode. Next, the main character's name is Nick in this game, which I forgot at the point when I started, so I initially named him Engelbart, or as close as I could approximate in Japanese. But to cut any confusion, I'll just refer to him as Nick throughout this video. Just know that whenever I say Nick, I'm talking about the main hero of the game. And you will see his name change to Nick halfway through. Why? I'll save that little nugget for when we get there. Also important to note here is that the introduction to this game plays right after you turn the Game Gear on and the Sega logo animation finishes. So if you hit start at that logo screen, it's going to skip that and take you straight to the title and you'll miss the entire intro. So if you want to watch it, other than right here and right now in this video I mean, you'll have to make sure that you wait and not do anything after powering the game on. The story of Shining Force Gaiden takes place 20 years after the original Shining Force. Henri from the last game is now the Queen of Guardiana. The kingdom has been rebuilt and fully recovered from the dramatic invasion of the Runefaust army in the first game. This game starts when a party from the Kingdom of Cyprus forces their way into the courtyard of Henri's castle. Ken and Lo from the original Shining Force try to protect their queen from the violent Cyprus group. It turns out the leader of the group is Waldal, and he gives Henri a present that turns out to be a trap that knocks her out and puts her to sleep, thus kicking off the events of this game. Waldol threatens to kill her if Guardiana gets in the way and heads out with his henchmen. The game proper starts with another cutscene showing that Guardiana sent a force to Cyprus to try and find and kill King Edmund, Waldol's liege, and break the spell on Henri. A month passes without any word from them, so for some reason Nick, a complete stranger, shows up and is put in charge of a new force that includes Roos the dwarf, Apis the centaur, Wendy the mage, Shade the archer, and Sig the monk. Some of this new group is related to heroes from the original Shining Force. For example, Apis is Ken's son, and Roos is Rog's son, who we may know better as Luke from the English translation of the first game. So the new Shining Force sails away on a ship, and if past Shining Force experience has taught us anything, it's that bad stuff always happens on ships, like this first battle. After a brief cutscene, battle number 1 begins on that ship. Lo from the original series serves as sort of the advisor this time around. As the group notes how quiet things are, they're attacked by a mage and some giant bats and other things. This is sort of a mini tutorial just to come to grips with how combat works. If you played the original Shining Force, well, there's nothing here that's going to surprise you. The same basic land effect rules apply here, where higher percentages increase your defense but slow your movement for ground-based characters. The game speed is pretty similar to the original, and while the overhead scenes look a lot more plain than in the original Genesis game, they're very brightly colored, which makes them easier to see on that washed-out Game Gear screen if you play on real, unmodified original hardware. What you might not expect is just how great these battle scenes look. Sure, they're lower resolution and lower color than those in the Genesis game, but the artistry on display here is really impressive considering the limitations of the hardware. The animation is still very basic in the fight scenes, but again, when considering that this is an 8-bit system and the cartridge size is a relatively small 512K, this comes off as impressive for what they were able to do. The music, as you can hear, is pretty great. Have a quick listen. Now, strategy-wise, if you want to make the game a smidge easier for the first few battles, kill a few enemies and then use the return spell. In English Shining Force titles, that's known as egress. Anyway, cast return and you can come back and keep fighting this batch of enemies until you get everyone up a few levels. Or, don't. It's totally up to you. Anyway, at the end of Battle 1, the nasty little mage blows your ship apart and everyone has to abandon it. Battle number 2 begins on the shore. It starts with Lo trying to wake up Nick. The Force wakes up on a shore and all their weapons are gone. Also, a group of monsters are accosting a poor woman who begs for your help. The baddies tell you to take a hike, but Lo tells you to search the area for anything that you can use as weapons, like sticks. And yeah, make sure you do that. It'll make this battle much easier than trying to fight barehanded. Just search the planks and barrels left by your ship's wreckage, and you'll find plenty of weapons and healing herbs that you can pick up. Make sure to equip your new weapons, and note that equipping a weapon does not take up a turn, so you can equip and attack in the same turn if necessary. Now there's a tougher enemy in the northeastern portion of the map, so be careful. Remember, Shining Force does not have permadeath, so it's not a big deal if any of your characters die. But let too many of them get killed off and you might not be able to win the battle and find yourself in a situation where you have to start it over from the beginning. Also, if Nick dies, you automatically lose the battle and have to start it over, so make sure that you keep him strong and away from tough enemies. At the end of this battle, you save the woman and recruit your first new character, Cray. Great, now we have 2 monks! Also, sometimes after battle when you return to camp, you'll notice that there's a shop there where you can purchase new items and equipment. Our first camp with a shop is found at this point, so you can replace all those sticks with actual weapons again. If you're short on money, start the next battle, kill a few enemies, then use the return spell to come back and repeat that process as much as you need to. Anyway, on to Battle 3. Battle 3 is a little bit tougher than the first 2. It begins with Cray letting us know that we need a ship to get to the mainland of Cyprus. This is pretty much our first completely traditional outdoor Shining Force battle, with rivers, trees, hills, and mountains. Also, the enemies here are a bit tougher again. If you haven't been leveling your characters relatively evenly, you may want to start correcting that at this point. I don't have much advice for this one, really, so just do it. Battle number 4 is a bit harder again. This one begins with Cray trying to sweet-talk his way into the fortress. It doesn't work out so well. So you'll notice that the difficulty so far has been kind of a gentle slope. It eases players into the game better than the original Shining Force. If you had any deaths, you want to make sure you use the return spell before starting this fight. There are some out-of-the-way chests on this map if you want them, or really any items or chests in this game, you have to get them during battle. If you miss them during battle, they're gone forever, with a couple of exceptions where you can get some things by paying for them in a shop. This map is pretty big, and if you want the chests in the upper left area, send a character with high movement like Apis out that way. Stick with it, make sure you don't put any characters near enemies by themselves, and you'll eventually get the win here, but this one will take you a while. Battle number 5 is the final battle of the first chapter. Again, use return if you need to revive anybody. The shop will also be there if you use return in this battle, so if you couldn't afford some weapons earlier, make sure you get them ASAP. I'd say battle number 5 is roughly the same difficulty as number 4, but it's on a much smaller and easier to navigate map, so it'll go by a lot quicker. The enemies are a smidge tougher, particularly the leader, but they're not too bad. So take out the leader, and the battle is done. The door to the fortress opens, and a new character flies in. His name is Barry. He was renamed to Claude in Shining Force CD. He joins you, and Chapter 1 is all done. We kick off Chapter 2 with battle number 6, another outdoor affair. Barry lets us know that we need to head to Azrit and that Cyprus forces are searching for the Resistance base. The bad guys there talk about some clown named Bazoo, and will be a little less than happy if they don't take out someone specific that they're looking for. Lo wonders who they're looking for and figures that we should find whoever he is first. Sounds like a plan, let's go. This map is a bit circuitous because of the winding river here. You can only cross either through the bridge on the north or the hills to the south. Other than some slow navigation through hills and trees, this one is pretty straightforward, so I won't spend a lot of time here. When you take out the leader or the last enemy, sorry I forget which, Lo comments that it sounds like there's some fighting going on inside the town and that we should go in. So, away we go! And here we are in battle number 7, which takes place in the town Azrit. Some monsters and mages take out a poor guard because he knows too much. The enemies are looking for Mayfair, who is a she, not a he, so this can't be the person they were talking about looking for. The bad guys find a secret staircase in the upper right portion of the town, but are surprise attacked by a centaur when the Shining Force arrives and the battle begins. This one can be a bit of a pain because of all the buildings, and navigation can be a bit tough because there are essentially a lot of narrow choke points all over the place. The battle itself isn't especially hard if you've been leveling up intelligently here, but just be careful not to position anyone where they're subjected to multiple attacks in one turn, basically. When you win this battle, the next cutscene starts. That centaur from the beginning of the fight emerges to thank Barry, and he tells us he's a bow knight named Stock. He sends the all clear, and a young woman named Mayfair emerges from the staircase. She tells us she's the daughter of the prior Archbishop of Cyprus, who was replaced by Waldal. She also lets us know that she's blind and a healer. And even worse, Waldal purposely blinded her after killing her father. Waldal doesn't sound like too nice of a guy, does he? Stock and Mayfair both join the force. And after that battle, there's another shop in the camp, so go ahead and buy any new weapons, equipment, and items that you need, and head on to battle number 8 when you're done. Battle number 8 brings us back to an outdoor map. Stock and Mayfair let us know that the tower, or keep, or whatever here, belongs to Bazoo, who is basically Waldal's top underling. So for this battle, we just need to make our way north, and the path is relatively clear this time around. We do see some new enemies like zombies here, and if you're playing this without a translation and can't read any Japanese, just be aware that if you're hit by a zombie, it can poison you, and poisoned characters lose 2 hit points per turn. You can cure poison with an antidote spell, antidote herb, or by visiting the church via the help option in your camp. Anyway, when you win this battle, Lo encourages us to go have a talk with Bazoo. And we do just that. So next up we meet Bazoo. He taunts us a bit and then casts a spell that tears up his own tower and essentially turns it into ruins with lots of impassable bottomless pits, kicking off battle number 9. The difficulty really ratchets up a bit here. You'll almost definitely want to grind a little, pick up some chests, use the return spell, and then come back. I should also point out that you can promote characters at level 10 in this game. I'm not sure in Gaiden here if it's better to level up some more than wait to promote, or to just promote right away, but generally I promote them as soon as I can in this one. You'll see Nick, or Engelbart as he's still named here, is promoted if you hadn't noticed that earlier. Anyway, because of the layout of this map and the way you have to snake around it, this is also the longest battle of the chapter. You'll also transition immediately into the next battle after you complete this one. Battle number 10 is the final battle of Chapter 2, in which our goal is to reach Bazoo and remove him from this mortal coil. He's in the upper right corner of the map, up a bunch of stairs. There are 2 routes you can take to the top. They split after you go up the first set of stairs. Also note, Bazoo has a priest with him, so it'd be wise to take the priest out first to stop them from healing Bazoo. Bazoo also has lightning magic, so you need to be real careful around him, especially with positioning characters too close to each other. Yes, this one is a bit of a slog, but it's not too tough overall. When you defeat Bazoo, he tells Nick that he's the person that they've been looking for all along here. He then calls out to Waldal to save him and transport him away. But before he goes, he tells Nick that they'll see each other again in Cyprus. Swell. A major revelation heads our way at this point, when a character comes up from the bottom of the screen and approaches Lo and Nick. Her name is Isha, and she drops a bomb on us by telling us that Nick is really the Prince of Cyprus. Her name in Shining Force CD will be Yisha, by the way. Anyway, that's the end of Chapter 2. Before we begin Chapter 3, a little personal side note. At this point in my playthrough, tragedy struck. My save file got corrupted, and I had to start the whole game over. Sadly, because of the way this game handles memory and hits up the file for character stats and info and to determine what battle you're in, it also rendered my save states useless, so I had no alternative but to restart. Now, I played a lot better and faster my second time through, and persevered so you could see the rest of the game. Also, I finally named the character Nick here for my second go-through to make life easier. Now then, back to the game. Chapter 3 begins with some text that generally says the Shining Force's ship was towed into a dock and inspected. Roos tries to convince some of the bad guys that he's a Cyprus native and that he escaped from the Guardiana Shining Force. The enemies buy it and let him go. As he heads on, we can see that about half the Force has already done this and gotten away with it, and Roos joins them. Now it's Nick's turn. Unfortunately, King Edmund shows up and recognizes Nick. He shouts for his guards to take him away. Thus begins battle number 11, with our force split into two sections. That's the only real gimmick in this battle. Some of the enemies are a little harder now, but as always, you can cast return and come back after doing some experience and level grinding. You'll really want to get on to promoting characters now if you haven't yet. Most of this fight is pretty basic, and you can just employ the standard strategies here. So make your way through this fight, and we'll meet an armored monster guy who welcomes Prince Nick back. There's some back and forth here from Lo about how the Shining Force doesn't think they can trust Nick anymore because he'd never told them that he was actually the prince from the enemy's kingdom. But the armored guy here says it's cool, Nick went to help them and plans to avenge his father and take his rightful place as the King of Cyprus. Everyone says, okay, cool, we're all best friends again. Nice. Anyway, the beast guy's name, as it turns out, is Teddy, and he joins the Force. This is where I'll note this character was named Gian or Gyan or something for Shining Force CD. After the battle, do some reviving if you need to, do some shopping, and continue onward. Before battle number 12 starts, we have a cutscene where Teddy and the Force comment on how they'll be too easy to spot in this wide, flatland area. Teddy tells the Force that he'll stand guard while they sleep in their tents. There's a fun little gag added to the Sega CD version that's not in this original version, which I'll tell you about when we get to that game in the retrospective. Sorry. Anyway, Waldol shows up and asks about the prince. He taunts Teddy for a moment, and then sicks a bunch of his monsters on the Shining Force, beginning battle number 12. Now this one is a little bit tougher. You're in a big open area, and you have to face tough enemies with strong physical attacks and strong magical attacks. Also noteworthy is that you can find the hidden character Domingo, who you might remember from Shining Force 1, hidden on this map during combat by searching a particular spot. Back to the battle proper, I'd probably suggest promoting everyone you can now if you haven't already done that. You really have to be careful around the Archknights and Sorcerers. The key here is to make sure no one, especially your weaker characters or Nick, gets surrounded. You don't want to cluster too many characters too close together either, otherwise they'll be fodder for the Sorcerers. So in this one you really have to know the movement and attack ranges of nearby enemies to succeed, which will help you make it through relatively unscathed. Now you only have to kill the leader, which is this skeleton called Deadly Born, and then after the fight you'll get a chance to revive and do some other churchy stuff. When we go into the next cutscene, we're in some caves, and the bad guys let Nick know that he's got to pass through here to get to Gondor, and that those who came before him died in this cave. Note that in Shining Force CD, they refer to this place as Gundal instead of Gondor, probably to avoid any shenanigans with the Tolkiens. Anyway, an old centaur rushes in to warn us to be careful of exploding mushrooms. The centaur gets knocked down by a zombie. We learn that this is Kashing, who apparently was with the Force originally sent from Guardiana a month prior to Nick's arrival. So here we are now beginning battle number 13. There's lots of undead enemies here, and they're pretty strong, so be careful. In a few certain spots, mushrooms will spawn when you get close enough to the tile that they're on. These enemies are called magical mushes. They can shoot out spores that put you to sleep with a radius of 3, meaning they could potentially get 12 characters in one shot. So take them out ASAP when they show up. Other than that, make your way to the upper left and take out the leader to finish this battle off. After we win, Kashing wakes up and joins the Force. We also learn that some of the earlier Guardiana Force were killed and others were captured and are being held in Gondor, so off we go to try and save those that we can. Before battle number 14, Kashing points out helpfully that Gondor is near. Yeah, we know, pal. It's literally the only structure on the map, but thanks anyway. This one really has a layout style that'll be familiar to veterans of the original Shining Force. Loads of trees, hills, and mountains that impede your progress. I have no special advice on this one. In fact, I'm going to skip over most of it because we saw an awful lot of this sort of thing already in the last game and earlier in this game. defeat the boss Minotaurus for the next cutscene. Gates emerges from Gondor and gives us the good news that Bazoo is killing one Guardiana captive for every Cyprus troop we defeat. What a jerk. After delivering those cheery tidings, Gate joins us and off we go. We get another cutscene before battle number 15 begins, where the force is taunted by two of Cyprus's most powerful generals, Dantum and Freybell. Freybell particularly goes on about this battle's major gimmick, the Fizzleball. And by the way, Freybell was adjusted to Frabell for Shining Force CD if you're interested. Anywho, Gates tells us that they're not anyone important, and notices that it's odd that there only seem to be soldiers and no magic-using enemies around. Can you guess what the Fizzleballs do? That's right, they stop magic from being cast. Swell! You could also just send Barry and or Domingo if you got them along the side of the map out of range of other enemies to try and sneak up and take out the Fizzleball with a minimum of fuss, making your magic users effective again. Up to you. Or you could also do what I did and just say, screw it, I just attack with your regular team and hope for the best. It's the worst possible way to do it, but on the plus side, it also required navigating the smallest number of menus. Always look on the bright side. Now the enemies are pretty tough here, and you have to kill them all to clear the map. Once you do, Freybell and Dantum show up. Freybell is pissed that you survived the awesome power of the Fizzleball. She wants Dantum to give her his soldiers to take down the old Shining Force, but Waldal tells her she's screwed up and teleports her away. He then orders Dantum to kill Prince Nick. Hey, wait, that's me! Oh no! Battle number 16 as the Shining Force head into Gondor Castle to do battle with Dantum and his goons. This is the 6th and final battle of Chapter 3. This map is mercifully small, but the central staircase is a bottleneck that can make things a bit annoying. There's nowhere to go but up, so my only advice here is to position your characters carefully so that none of them are next to each other until you take out the sorcerer, otherwise you're inviting disaster. Once the sorcerer is gone, it's much easier to advance. The other thing to be careful of here are the enemies that approach from the right side of the screen like the Minotauruses. Be careful not to leave a character with low defense in the Minotaurus' range, or it might one-shot them. Your ultimate goal in this battle is to defeat Dantum. Oh, and if you want a literal translation of his name in this version, it's Dantumu. Be especially careful with Nick around him. You don't want to lose at the end of this battle and have to do the whole thing over. Once Dantum is defeated, he says he just can't kill Prince Nick because he served his family for too long, and that Edmund is in Waldal's power. Well, sorry to break the news to you, Dantum, but you can't kill me when you're in the middle of dying anyway. Before he bites the big one, Dantum also drops the fact that Waldal worships some evil spirit called Eom. He asks us to be careful and then kicks the bucket. That's a lot of death metaphors, huh? Anyway, the chapter concludes with another bird warrior named Shriek approaching us and joining our still-growing force. Shriek also lets us know that Lug/Luke has survived and is headed for Cyprus after escaping in the chaos of the battle here at Gondor. Alrighty folks, this is it. The final chapter of Shining Force Gaiden. It begins by kicking us straight into Battle 17. King Edmund himself is in the bottom right corner of the map in the town, wondering why he should fight since he's a king and all. He also seems to understand in some way that he may have been fooled by Waldal. Now this fight is a traditional outdoor map full of hills, trees, grass, and mountains. The goal here is to kill the leader, which is, of course, Edmund, down in that lower right corner. Now difficulty isn't too bad in this fight. I definitely recommend characters that travel well through trees and any flyers you have though. Now the one little fly in the ointment in this battle is that as you head down towards the bottom right, near where the mountains kind of meet, some golems will spawn in from nowhere. When you engage Edmund, more golems emerge from the upper right corner of their screen and start making their way down towards you to try to make the fight with Edmund more difficult. But it's pretty easy to just block them off. So this battle isn't especially difficult as long as you don't let any of your characters get caught by golems by surprise. Take out Edmund, and you're done here. With his dying breath, Edmund stays classy by calling Nick a traitor to Cyprus for killing his own uncle and his fellow Cyprus citizen. Randolph emerges from the town and tells you not to take Edmund's words to heart, that Edmund was just Waldal's puppet. Randolph was Nick's knight, and the sole survivor of his platoon or whatever battle group he was in. He wants to fight Waldal and he joins the force. Battle number 17 begins with Randolph pointing out that Waldal is in a fortress at the top of the mountain here. Waldal's minions talk about how once the summoning of Eom is done, they'll be invincible, and then the battle starts. This map is a bit tougher than the last one, both geographically, and includes more difficult enemies. Keep your mages and healers behind your main physical attackers, and don't place them side by side if you can help it to avoid getting nailed by some nasty spells from Belials. Personally, I feel the beginning section of this fight is much harder than the end section. So once you get about 2/3 of the way through, as long as you aren't careless, it's pretty easy to prevail here. When you win, Lo lays down some smack talk and off you go to the save screen. Save if you want, and continue to the next battle. Battle number 18 begins with an enemy general taunting you. This is kind of funny because the translation from Shining Force CD changes this part a bit. Gepparu here, known as Geppel in Shining Force CD, complains that he's bored and he's done everything and he's kinda glad you're giving him something to do. At least that's the gist of it. There's a chest in the upper right, but it has a cursed sword in it. I mean, it's worth some money if you want to sell it, but I don't like using cursed weapons. Still, unless you're really hurting for gold at this point, it's probably not worth bothering with, in my opinion. Again, you gotta be extra careful with positioning at this point, and you have to make sure your force is filled with the most powerful characters from now on. It doesn't matter too much which ones you go with as long as their levels are sufficient. Be super careful of the magic-using enemies like the Demon Masters and Belials here. Is it Belials or Belials? I don't know. Whatever, just pretend I said it right. However you pronounce their names, they can ruin your day real quick. Make your way toward the north side of this relatively small map to fight and defeat Gepparu. In the cutscene at the end, Gepparu regrets that he was sloppy and let you defeat him, and then asks if you remember Bazoo and Freybell. He tells you that Waldol has made them even stronger than they were. Lo is totally cool with that and volunteers the Shining Force to kick their butts, and so on we go. Next up, battle number 19 puts the Shining Force into the hall of the castle that leads to the throne room. Waldol shows up to let you know he's already finished summoning a devil from Eom, and you'll face them in the next room should you survive. Here we've got to take out Bazoo and Freybell. This map is kind of on the tough side, but if your levels are high, it's not too bad as long as you're very careful. Once again, it's all about positioning and avoiding magic-based and breath attacks. Lead with your strong characters yet again, keep magic users in the rear, the usual. Pay attention to the chimeras, and pay special attention to the assassins that start out in the upper right. They have powerful physical bow attacks. Take out the bosses one at a time. Doesn't matter too much which one you go for first, just make sure to concentrate on one. In the end here, Bazoo says something about the creature arriving and that it'll help them conquer the entire world. And here we are, right in battle number 20, our second to last battle of the entire game. This takes place in the throne room of the castle. Here we encounter old Waldol himself, along with his nasty evil friend Majin, which is Japanese for devil. In Shining Force CD, that character is just called Evil Monster. The super important thing to keep in mind here is that Majin's attack range is 3, and he has a nasty area of effect spell. This fight might seem difficult if you just kind of rush into it, but here's my advice for this one. Send as many characters to tiles 4 spaces away from Majin as you can. As you take out regular enemies, and there are some strong ones here, advance forward every time that you're able to. Meaning once a character can move forward while remaining at least 4 spaces away from Majin, you're good. Take out Waldol to get him out of the way. He's got some nasty magic, but he himself isn't all that tough. After that, I suggest going after the evil bishop to prevent his annoying area of effect healing spell. Once all of the other enemies are taken down, position a few characters in spaces near Majin where his area of effect spell can't hit more than maybe one of you at a time. This fight is very manageable if you take that approach. Now a word of caution, if a lot of your characters die before the end of this fight, use return before you start the next battle. Yeah, that'll put you back to the beginning of this one, so why do you want to do that? Because if you return out of the final battle, you'll come back to the start of this one. So your goal here is to keep as many of your characters alive as possible at the end. So anyway, after you finish off Majin, Waldol shows up distraught that we killed his little demon buddy. He says he's going to keep his treasure though. By then, Rug, aka Luke from Shining Force 1, shows up and stops him from escaping out through the back door. Rog snags the sword of Hajia from an extra distraught Waldol, who decides, screw it, I'm just gonna become a monster and kill all y'alls. Rog tells you that you can't defeat Waldol unless you use the Sword of Hajia on him. That's the sort of thing in the old days that people used to call anti-gaijin protection, because if you couldn't read Japanese, you'd have no idea what to do here. Anyway, here we are, folks, in battle number 21, the final battle. As I said before, if you use the return spell here, you will go back to the start of battle number 20, the prior battle, so you don't want to have to do that. The same thing applies, of course, if Nick dies here. Now, Waldol has become a nasty, scorpion-like evil thing. There aren't too many other enemies really to worry about here, a few sentinels and some taluses, and they hit fairly hard, but they're definitely manageable. Before you do anything else, you must have Rug give the Sword of Hajia to Nick. you cannot damage Waldal until after hitting him with the Sword of Hagia. So if Rog dies, guess what? You literally can't damage the boss at all. After Nick attacks Waldal with the Sword of Hagia and damages him, then other characters will also be able to damage him. Once again, space your characters out carefully. Used range attackers at least 4 spaces away from each other, along with a close attacker or 2 to minimize Waldal's area of effect spells and have a healer handy to take care of Nick's hit points if necessary. The last thing to note here is that the evil bishops will spawn from the door behind the throne, so it's best to send a character up there to block that door as soon as you can. I'd suggest making it one of your weaker attackers ideally. Keep plugging away at Waldal and you'll eventually take him out. Okay, and that's it. We won! Hooray! We get a few throwaway comments from allies in the Force, but then Sig tells Roos that it's pretty neat that Rog is still alive. Father and son have a brief touching reunion. But then poor Nick spins around and collapses while some evil music plays. Teddy comments about how Nick's right arm just turned to stone. Then an ominous voice booms in and tells Nick that he'll have to face him if he ever wants to heal his arm. But good news, Henri is back to normal, so we did save Guardiana, hooray! Some of the Guardianan heroes offer to go to Cyprus in order to help Nick recover from his malady. They offer this to repay him in exchange for him having helped save Guardiana. The final words spoken in the text box before the game ends are, "To Cyprus!" And then we get a little bit of text here explaining that the victory is fleeting and more challenges lie ahead. And then the staff credits roll. After the credits are done, we get the lovely message that the game is to be continued. Alright, so I'll dive into my very quick review of Shining Force Gaiden now. Shining Force Gaiden was really a great way to bring the series onto a portable system back in 1992. It's a shame that this was a Japan-only release, but I'm glad we eventually got an official translation of it as Shining Force CD Book 1. The game was on a relatively tiny 4-megabit cartridge, a mere 512 kilobytes. The original Shining Force on Genesis, remember, was on a 12-megabit cartridge, so it was 3 times the size of this portable side story. Considering the spec differences between the systems and the memory size differences between them, clearly sacrifices had to be made. So the question is, does Shining Force Gaiden retain enough of that Shining Force DNA to be a worthwhile side story/sequel? Now, I'm not gonna lie. Having removed the towns cuts out a lot of Shining Force's personality from this game. It's definitely not the same without them. However, I'd say that this one actually has more of an in-depth story than the first game, even though we only see it play out in cutscenes right before or after battles. The gameplay itself is still great, employing the nice speedy menu system from the original and the fast strategic gameplay that had already become a hallmark of the series. And the music, despite being pumped through a little 4-channel PSG that was ancient by 1992, is just really well composed and sounds great. Aside from the lack of real towns, there are 2 other minor downsides here. First, the graphics have taken a pretty major hit, as, you would have expected, but the game still looks good despite being so simplified. Now remember, the Game Gear resolution is only a meager 160 by 144, the same as the original Game Boy. Unlike the Game Boy, however, the Game Gear can show 32 colors on screen at once from a palette of 4096. Now the colors in Shining Force Gaiden are really nice and really pop. They're very bright, but the lack of detail in the overhead scenes is extremely apparent. The other problem is, of course, the game's length. In this run, it took me roughly 10 hours, not counting losing my game save, and another glitch that made me replay a chapter twice. Now, with experience, you can probably beat this game in about 7 hours on a casual playthrough, so this game is very short. The largest Game Gear games were about 1 megabyte or 8 megabits. Now, that would have been prohibitively expensive in 1992 most likely. But if they could have just squeezed in one more chapter, I think the game would have been a better length. I don't know if that would have been possible. They claim they did everything they could with this, and it's a very good game, but it just feels like it's a little too brief an experience. So all things considered, Shining Force Gaiden is still a really good Shining Force title. There are a few things that are a step forward from the original, and unfortunately a few that are also a step back, which, again, is to be expected considering the hardware downgrade from Genesis to Game Gear. Even with the system's limitations in mind, I feel like this game, while good, really could have been great. For what we ended up with, I'll give Shining Force Gaiden a review score of 7 out of 10. But unless you're a real Game Gear nut, don't play this version, just play it on the Sega CD, which you'll see me cover here in the not too distant future. So lastly, I'd like to hear from you. Have you played Shining Force Gaiden before in this original Game Gear incarnation? Or do you only know the game maybe from the translated Sega CD, Shining Force CD Book 1? Tell me all about it in the comments. And that'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoyed it, please like it and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll know as soon as my videos are released. If you're super swell and want to support the work that I do here, you can do that on Patreon, Ko-fi, or now through YouTube channel memberships. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.